Welcome to the Restored Hope podcast, where we talk about domestic abuse, trauma, grief recovery, stories of hope, and resilience. In each episode, we'll discuss various topics such as why women stay in abusive relationships, the impact of domestic abuse on the victim's health and the children, overcoming adversity, and many more. The podcast provides helpful information to support, inspire, and empower you to regain your confidence and help you on your healing journey to move from that place of pain into your God-given purpose. I am your host, Bisi Gbadebo. Thank you for tuning in. Hello and welcome to the Restored Hope podcast. Thank you for joining me on another episode. I have a special guest with me today, and she's going to be sharing her story with us and telling us more about what she does. So her name is Beverly. You're welcome. Welcome to the show. Welcome, Beverly.
Hello, BC.
You're welcome. Beverly, she's a specialist practitioner with the Chrysalis Effect, working with the emotional and relationship section of the recovery program in our area of expertise for referral. With her own lived experience as a survivor of sexual abuse, being brought up within the care system, and being part of a toxic family environment, Beverly specializes in adverse childhood experiences and is passionate about opening conversations to enable awareness and support for others. So I am so happy to have you here, Beverly. And I would like you to introduce yourself to us and tell us more about you, about what you do.
Thank you, BC, and I'm really pleased to be on here. Well, where do I start? That's a wonderful introduction, and thank you. And for anyone listening, it sounds quite a mouthful, so I'm going to try and put it in layman's terms as well for everybody.
Okay. Yeah.
So first and foremost, I work with adults, mostly adults and young people, who have experienced, I'm going to say trauma, but also stress in their childhood growing up. And so they've learned survival skills that have got them through their childhood, which have been fantastic. And that's credit to their strength and resilience. However, learning to be vulnerable and to nurture ourselves is often challenging if we've not always learned that growing up. And so it has a medical impact later on in life. Extreme stress, fatigue, anxiety. And when we use the word trauma, to some people that can be huge, because often we don't recognize that what we've experienced is actually trauma. So you touched on a little bit of my background, and even myself, and I'll share my story in a minute, even myself, I thought it was a normal upbringing. But when we look at, for instance, a child going into an environment, let's take, for example, school, and they're being bullied by one person, and that could be, in their own peer group, it could be by a teacher, it could be more than one person. Imagine facing that scenario every day and the resilience you have to have. Wow. And that's great then, but it does impact later. And that's the kind of thing I want to share later, and also be able to give some tips for people who are listening and it's resonating with.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing that. I really love that part about the adverse childhood experience, how, what the children, adults now have gone through when they were younger, and that is impacting their health now or their life now, and you're able to help in that area. I'm sure we'll hear more about that. Thank you. So, can you share with us, let us know more about you, what you went whilst growing up, and how you got to helping others now?
Thank you, BC. I'm going to take you back to when I was 4, and at that time, my mum and dad had 3 children. I was 4, my brother was 3, and I had a younger sibling who was 2. And one day we had the police knock on our door, and we were taken away by social services. Now, that sounds very alarming and daunting, and that does not happen to everybody. What I didn't know back then was this was a lead-up through negligence and the bravery of different people contacting social services. So we were taken to the police station, and then we were taken into a children's home. The children's home, I remember being there the first day, because whilst I wasn't scared, that's what we call a traumatic experience. It's something out of the norm, with different people coming in, with strangers. And I dealt with it at the time, and I ironically still have good memories of that as well. So I remember being taken to the police station, and it actually being an adventure, because the policewoman was all smiley. It was actually realising that my mum was in some sort of distress. And then when she said goodbye, it impacted on me as a young person. And I remember that feeling of letting go. When will I see her again? So I picked that up without realising. We were taken into a wonderful children's home. And I remember that night having a bath, which is something we didn't have at home because of the poverty we came from, being wrapped in a lovely towel and having pyjamas on. And I spent 6 years in that children's home. And I have to say, I have some wonderful memories. Yes, I also have other memories of seeing my parents at time and not seeing them. That was the traumatic stage, and that was the to-ing and fro-ing, because you're not living with your biological parents. And at that age, I didn't understand that they were unable to look after me and my siblings. My mum and dad continued to have children, and another sibling joined us at the age of 6 months, and they had another child that was adopted out, and they had 2 young children that they kept at home, and we used to take it in turns to go home at weekends. Where some of the trauma happens is, once again, when I was 10, I was suddenly told at the beginning of December, oh, you're going to go home in 3 days' time, in time for Christmas. And that sounds fantastic. But actually, it was something that was very traumatic for me. And for the next 3 nights, I had night terrors. Because as much as I wanted to be part of a normal family, and I wanted to be with my parents, there was another side of me that didn't want to be with my parents. So for 3 years, we went home, and then for 3 years, I then became the main carer. Because my mum and dad, sadly, didn't realise it then, but looking back, were alcoholics. And yes, we had an awareness, because we realised the impact if my parents didn't have a drink in the lunchtime, how they would be. But this is the thing about, it was the norm. We didn't know any different. So what we did, we learned how to navigate our relationship to keep as safe as possible. Sadly, by the summer of 1977, we had no gas and no electricity. And again, I want to thank my neighbours, because they were brave enough to call the NSPCC. Because at that time, I was the carer, the main carer for all 6 of us, and my mum and dad when they came home. And when I was cooking dinner, which was only the weekend, because luckily we had school meals, I had a Calagas stove. You know, like when you're camping, those single stoves. So I learned very quickly how to do one-pot cooking. So I was 12 when I started really doing that a lot, but coming into 13. And although we'd had threats of going back into care, and when I say threats, when my dad was drunk once or twice, he threatened that. Ironically, my sister and I wanted that to happen. We wanted to go back into care. So can you see that wrench? You love your parents unconditionally when you're growing up, but something doesn't feel right.
Oh, yes.
So we went back into care, but again, it was done very quickly. And the younger ones, because of where we lived, went into care under the borough of Croydon. But myself and my 2 other siblings were still under a court order in the borough of Bromley from when we were 4. So we went into a children's home in the borough of Bromley. So we were separated there, which had a huge impact because I'd been keeping them together as a close family unit, and suddenly we're all being split apart.
Was that when you were 12 years old now, or 13?
Yes, 13. 13.
So when you were 10, that you came home, to spend the time, did you go back? Because you mentioned that when you were 10, you went home to spend some time, and then now you have to be the one taking care of everyone.
So between the age of 4 and 10, we were going home and taking it in turns every other weekend. When I was 10, we were going home full time. My mum had been given a council house in Norbury, and we were all suddenly going to be together full time. So when I went home at the age of 10, my mum was actually 27 years of age, and she went from having 2 toddlers at home to having 6 children, 10 and under at home.
Wow.
So I understand some of that. And one of the things my mum and dad did as well, they both worked full time. Hence I became the carer. It was just they then went into the pub after work. So again, I was looking after the children after school. Didn't think anything of it. You just do it, and I have some happy memories because you make them happen. And you get on with it. Don't know anything different. And I had some good role models from being in children's home. So when I went back into a different children's home when I was 13 and we were all separated, 2 years later, I knew I wanted to be part of a normal family. And when I was 15, I was fostered, I should say, not adopted, fostered by my English teacher, which was fantastic. And that was wonderful. However, that has consequences because I didn't know how to behave in a normal family. And whilst I didn't have outward behaviour issues, I didn't understand what that family's way of working was. And they didn't understand why I didn't respond the same way as their son. So within a year, it broke down. And at 16, I returned to a children's home quickly as an emergency, but I also said, I'm going to have to live on my own sometime. I'd like to do it within the support of social services. And so I was sent to a hostel in Bromley. And that for me was a huge relief. And I'll never forget the turning point of knowing that I had choice. Because one of the things that happened was on Christmas Day, when I was 13, there were myself and about 5 other vulnerable young people sitting around the Christmas dinner table, because we did a dinner between us. And as I sat around the table, I realised we all had responsible adults around us, but nobody had actually asked our story. So all these people were making choices on our behalf, but nobody had actually asked. For instance, when I was 10, I was comforted, but nobody had actually asked me why I was crying. And the reason why I didn't want to go back home is because even at the age of nearly 4, before the police turned up, my dad had started to sexually abuse me. And that had gone on throughout my childhood until I stopped him when I was about 14, 15.
Wow. So whilst you were, from that age 4 that you were taken out of, from your family home into care, nobody sat you down to say, okay, tell me what's going on, what's been going on with you, and nobody.
No.
And you had to go back. Oh, wow.
Yeah. So the trauma, knowing that I was going back to live with my mum and dad, and knowing that I was being sent to live full time at home with my dad, you can imagine. But even then, and I'm sure some of your listeners, as challenging as this to listen to, but even if they had abusive parents physically or emotionally, there's one part of you that doesn't want to be in that area with your parents, but there is this instinctive need for every child to want to be with their birth parents.
Oh yes, oh yes.
So that is hugely challenging. However, as children, we find a way and we keep safe. And we use different mechanisms and what I call survival tools to keep safe.
Oh yes.
Disassociation, you shut off the pain physically, emotionally, you take yourself away, you tell yourself it'll be over soon. All of these coping mechanisms.
Wow.
So whilst I'm talking, I just want to be sure any of your listeners, I won't go into detail. So if anyone's fearful of being triggered, I won't go into further details, but just to say, I hear you. So it took me to when I was 16, sitting at the hostel that time, looking at everyone around me, to suddenly think, one day when I'm older, I'm going to use my voice. And I thought it was going to be in a room full of people at the NSPCC so that I could say thank you to them, but also tell them what goes on behind closed doors. And that's why I use my voice today and have done. I didn't straight away in my recovery, but that's why now I like opening these conversations. And when we talk about ACEs, the bit that I'm passionate about is ACEs is actually a questionnaire that was originated from America, and it's a tool that can be used, I feel, to open a conversation. So I myself have used that questionnaire, and I've interpreted it slightly differently. But if we look at the different categories, every child has basic needs. So first of all, every child wants to be loved and nurtured by their parents. And when they don't receive food and drink regularly, or they don't receive the cuddles and the warmth, that's neglect. And whether it's because you're in poverty and you don't have the food, or whether it's that you've come from a very privileged background, but it was still withheld for you, it is still impactful. And I say this because a lot of people assume that ACEs happens to people in poverty, but that's not true. Okay, so I want to get that one off the table first of all.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, it happens to everyone.
Everyone,
whether you're in poverty or you're high up there, it happens to everyone. It has no.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Then you have abuse, and when I speak about abuse in this, I also think about bullying, because that's what abuse is. So we may minimize bullying at school, but when we talk about sticks and stones will break our bones, but words will never hurt us, that's not true. That's not true at all. Those words resonate and they stay there, and they are the messages that we take forward. So emotional bullying, whether it's withdrawing love, whether it's speaking in a way that is triggering, whether you're gaslighting, and when we talk about gaslighting, whether things are being said to evoke an emotion. So gaslighting is when somebody says something to evoke a reaction from you. So they'll drop something in conversation. It may be a taunt, it may be something that sounds quite innocent, but they'll drop it in, and yet they know that you're going to react to it in whatever different way. Okay, so I'm trying to do it as basic as possible, and the reason why I'm saying this is often we lose it in the translation and we don't put it into our everyday life. And when a parent's doing it to you, it is really challenging, because you learn from a parent.
Yeah.
abuse comes in emotional forms.
Mm-hmm.
It comes in also physical, being beaten.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But not even, you don't even have to experience it yourself per se, but to witness your parents or a sibling being beaten. That is traumatic as well.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah.
And again, with sexual abuse. So obviously different factors there. But again, having the knowledge that someone's being abused is just as traumatic as being there as well. And I'm not taking away anybody's experience, but it's important that we're aware of this.
Yeah.
So when I'm asking the questions, I just say yes or no, because I'm not asking anybody to go back to their trauma. I just want to be able to acknowledge this so we can open a conversation.
Okay.
Then we have the other factors. So I spoke to you about my parents being addicts. Okay. Now, addiction comes in many different ways. Okay. There's the ones such as drink, drugs. There's also workaholic. That's an addiction.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Shopping, hoarding. You know, there's many other addictions. Some are more socially acceptable. And that's why I open these conversations with my clients as well, by asking these questions and highlighting what they mean about addictions. Because if you've got a parent that's a hoarder, and that addiction is really high, can you imagine the impact that has on you as a child growing up? So that just gives you something to think about. Another one to think about is I was separated from my parents. Yeah. I went into care. Now, there are other reasons to be separated, and some of them are with good intentions. So if you have a parent that's got the opportunity to do a good job and they're travelling away for long periods, it may be that a child goes to boarding school because it's traditional, it's secure, it's safe than being moved around. And you can put two children in the same boarding school and one child will flourish, but the other child won't. And they will find it challenging, and they will have attachment issues later on in adult life.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So can you see how what happens in childhood can have an adverse effect later in adulthood?
Wow. Yeah. That is true. That is true, actually, because it's what we do in our adult life. It's the experiences that we've had over the years. That's what we know. So that's what we portray, and that's how we live, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Oh.
But the impact, can I just share here, BC?
Okay.
Is not just mental. It's physical, because our bodies work hard to keep us safe. And that's where our bodies later in life, if we're unable to find a voice to verbalise experiences, they stay inside us and they come out physically. So chronic fatigue, ME, fibromyalgia, lots of autoimmune diseases, heart attack, heart disease, diabetes, you name it. If you look underneath, that's often a catalyst. And when I say that, it's about being able to, in a safe environment, recognise what's stored there to release it. And I know that from my own experience.
So from there, did you receive the support? Were you able, because you said nobody asked you what was going on, why are you crying? So later, did anyone know? Did you tell anyone? Were you able to receive the support you
at 16
needed at that time?
At 16, absolutely not. And but the messages and the expectations that I was receiving through the media, through people around me, was that I carried a lot of shame and guilt. So I'd come from a children's home. There's shame. At school growing up, I was always asked, what did you do wrong? Because it was assumed I did something wrong to be in the children's home, and I didn't. So Yet also, because I'd been in and out of care, the expectation was, and this is, you know, that I was going to have a very young family. And this is no disrespect to any young young person on their own having children, but that I was going to recreate everything that I'd experienced. And that used to frighten me a lot, that I'd be an addict, you know, you name it, I'd probably end up in prison. And again, I say that not because I am making any judgments, but because often young people from care end up in prison because they've not had support, etc. So I knew what was expected of me, which was zero.
Wow.
And I have this tenacity about me that was like, I had this fire in my belly, this anger, if you want to say, that was like, I'm going to change this. I'm going to break the cycle. And I knew that one day I'd have family, but I didn't want it early either. And so at first I wanted to work to be accepted by society. I wanted to grow up and not see anything of my past. So I learned very quickly to work hard. I had that ethic. I worked really hard. I worked myself up. I started working a department store, Debenhams at the time, got headhunted, went to Alders, worked myself up as a young manager, went to college. I started modelling in my mid-20s, which I didn't want to do. It was an opportunity that came to me. And I looked like I had it all. And I wore this mask, if you see what I mean. But I never want anyone to get close to me because I didn't want them to see the real me inside. So I was frightened that if they knew the real me inside, they'd reject me, and I didn't want to be rejected again. And because they kept thinking that what's wrong with me? My parents didn't love me. They didn't want me. My foster mum didn't want me. Any connections I'd made in children's home had gone. So I kept thinking there was something wrong with me. Ironically, I'd met my ex-husband and we then split up, and then we got back together again. And it was only later that when we started to have children, and I had a first sibling, and I won't obviously go into details because they have their own story, but I had my first child, and then I had a second child very quickly, but my second child was a girl, and I didn't realise that my first child was coming to the age I was when I was being first sexually abused. So that's a mirror. So I had this fear. I've done all this and now I've got no control, because how do I protect my children? How do I keep them safe? That's when the downward spiral happened. That's the trigger. And I didn't realise what was happening physically. And I just reached out one day to Samaritans and said, I need to speak to someone. And I worked, first of all, with a wonderful charity called Family Matters. And I got counselling with them. And that was the start of my recovery journey.
Oh, wow.
So I was in my early 30s when that first started.
Wow. Wow. After so many years. And, you know, so many people would be going through such now that, you know, they've stored up so much trauma in them, and like you said, now resulting to physical ailment, you know, fibromyalgia, joint pains and different things, not knowing that is because of the, you know, their childhood trauma that this is happening to them. You know, so it's good that you shared that for our listeners that are listening. I believe most of the health issues that people are going through, is, if we look closely, and which there are so many researches on that as well, that it's due to some of the traumas that we've stored in our body, because, you know, there was no help, and maybe people don't even know how to respond to that, or to support, or to help. So, and we carry that into our adulthood, and you know, and it's that manifests in different ways. So
Absolutely.
thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. Getting to that place that you now know that, you know what, I need this support. And some people, you know, they don't even know what to do. They don't know what they're supposed to do, how to reach out to someone, because there are no materials out there telling them, okay, if you're going through this, or sometimes, like you said, people will just push it away and think that, oh, this one is from this background, this is what they're going to result into.
Can I just highlight something, BC, as well?
Yes.
So when was that point that I reached out? I did try to reach out earlier on.
Okay.
But if you imagine a tortoise,
Mm-hmm.
so I had my big shell around me to keep me safe. Okay. And you couldn't, people often said that I was cold, but I wasn't. It's just I didn't trust anybody, because if I trusted you, were going to hurt me. So I kept this hard shell around me. And I remember the first time I tried to reach out, that was really hard. And as soon as I did and I didn't get a response, I pulled back in. But that's normal. I didn't know back then. That's normal. And I just want people to know that. And I tried to keep everything controlled to make sure that my children had, regular meals, they were bathed and cleaned. But when I even look back with some of the learning that I have now, yes, I cuddled them, but sometimes I would think I don't want to smother them. If I could go back, that's probably one thing I would change, because I probably could have given them even more cuddles, but I didn't know how to sometimes. And I'm going to admit that as a parent, because as a parent, when we're parents or caregivers, if we've been able to look at our own triggers or how we respond, how can we expect our children to learn? So it's when my children were young, as I said, and I had this mirroring, I just felt at that time, my body kept being ill. I kept getting viruses. And when you go to the doctor in the biomedical world, yes, they're fantastic for diseases and broken bones. But generally, when you're being given tablets for symptoms, which is your body showing like migraines, to be honest, let's look at what's causing that migraine.
Yes.
But I didn't know that at that time. I just felt that my body didn't know how to word it, but at that time I was having an out of body experience. I kept being dizzy, having migraines, and that was my triggers. And it was in desperation. There was a little voice inside of me saying, I need some help. And that's when I reached out.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to reiterate that part, because often we feel that we're weak then, and that's not weak. That's the time.
Yeah.
It takes courage to reach out.
Yeah. Yes. So for our listeners, it's for them to recognize the triggers, to really go to the root of what the problem, or what is manifesting as ill health. Am I right? What is manifesting as physical ill health, to really go back to what could be causing this, instead of just taking medications and taking medication. There's something there that needs to be.
And often we can't go far back, because our body won't let us. It will shut our brain off, the foggy brain, the memories that will be shut off. And I'm not asking anyone to go back. One of the things I like to reassure everyone is, once we acknowledge that something's going on in our body, emotionally we've either shut off, or you keep crying. One of the things I say when I'm working with my clients is, it's okay. That's one of the first steps, to acknowledge.
Yeah.
And secondly, you don't have to go back to each traumatic experience.
Absolutely.
It's being able to work with someone to look at how you've responded, how you still respond, and what can you change. And I will also say, doing it on your own is nigh impossible. So even now, as a qualified practitioner, and for my own self-care, and self-care is where it comes into, I still have support by other people. And I have to, because unless I look after myself, when you're on an aeroplane and they tell you to put your gas mask on first.
Yes.
Now, This is a great example. Years ago, when my children were young, and they'd say, put your gas mask on first before you put it on the children. I think, no, I'll put it on the children first. I couldn't understand what they were saying. I now understand. If you're a carer of so many other people, but you don't look after yourself because you don't know how to, by learning self-care and putting that face mask on, it means you can then help more people. So I could help my children. I could help the whole plane if I really wanted to. That's the same in recovery of anything.
Yeah, help yourself first so that you can help others.
Yes,
that is good advice.
Oh, just one last thing I wanted to say, BC.
Yeah.
Because sometimes someone listening thinking, oh, that's all well and good, but it's different for me. And I understand everybody has a different story.
Yeah.
But there are some signs around us. So, for instance, what's your relationships like around you? Are you in a relationship that's healthy, or is it abusive? Are you happy? Because if you're in a relationship that actually is one-sided and you're working hard all the time to please the other person, you may have learned that growing up. What does that other person bring to you? And these are some of the different signs that you see, as well as your health.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you. And so how do you help adults now? Is it just adults you help, or also children, or it's
mostly adults and young people. That's not young people. Yeah. That's not because I don't care about children. I do, and I made a conscious decision not to work with children, only because I'd want to take them all home. But also, there's a lot of adults out there that are young. We're all young children inside of us, and we've done a marvelous job. And let's also celebrate the strengths that people have. We are remarkable. People get whether they're fighting to do it or they're finding ways to cope to get through it. We get through so much adversity, and all of us have been lately, whether in different ways. So that's why I work with adults, because we've got a lot of unheard voices. Okay, now the first thing that I'm working with my clients is, first of all, we look at, where are you today? So we take a snapshot of where you are today. Where do you want to be? And then we look back at your coping mechanisms and what is it you want to change, and also find out if some of the messages that you have subconsciously are really true today. Yeah. But the biggest thing is looking at our feelings of shame, and silence exacerbates shame. Guilt, is it your guilt to carry? Because often we carry so much guilt for other people. And the word should, I always say, are you using should a lot, or sorry? Because should is expectations of others. And sometimes we say sorry when it's not even our fault.
Yeah. Yes.
So so we've all been there.
Yes.
So there's sort of some little things for people to be able to look at. But one thing, and this is something I'm not going to put you, I will put you on, I'm not expecting you to answer, BC, but this is a question I'm going to put to you that I put to everybody.
Yeah.
What one thing do you do for yourself every day that whilst you're doing it, you're aware of you're doing it, and it makes you feel loved and nurtured?
Yes. Do you want me to answer that?
If you've got something, yes.
So one thing I do for myself every day is, I say affirmations. I say things, good things to myself every day. Every day I do that.
Yeah, lovely. And how does that make you feel when you do that?
Oh, it makes me feel, that what I'm saying about myself. It makes me, if I say that I am blessed, or I am beautiful, or I am strong, especially that's strong. I am strong, and because sometimes you wake up and you just want to stay in bed.
Yes.
So that I'm strong. So saying that kind of changes one's mindset, believe in yourself that I am this, regardless
Yeah.
of what somebody else says that I am. I know this is who I am, you know. Yeah.
And I'm going to talk to you about some of the science behind that. That's why I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
So, when we have negative thoughts and we say negative things to ourselves, the impact on our body is physical. And I won't go into the science of the brain, but so I don't actually say mental, I say neurological, because when you say when you first wake up, let's be frank here, we don't always wake up ready to bounce out of bed. And that can feel really heavy, and our body doesn't have any energy, and it struggles. And yet when we find something like you have your affirmations. Myself, I'll check in with myself, how do I feel? And I do some deep breaths, and I will clean my teeth, because that's an important part of me having a voice, and have that feeling of, yes, I'm worthy. And it takes learning. Suddenly our body and our neurological brain works in a different way. It's like, oh, okay, let's have some energy. Okay, it's not heavy. Okay, it may be challenging today, but I'm in a positive frame of mind now. I am worthy, and I will find a solution, even in the darkest of days. And there's a great saying here that even when you're laying in the gutter, you still have choices.
Yeah.
So you can choose to lay down with your face in the gutter, in the mud, in the water, or by turning around, you're still laying in the gutter, but you can look out at the stars.
Yeah.
So you're already opening your mind to what's around me. I'm not going to miss any opportunity. So I love sharing that, because we've been talking about some subjects that are really challenging, and you know, in any life, doesn't matter how wonderful it looks or feels, there will be challenges.
Yeah, there would
that's
be.
what happens.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. That you know, even when you're still in the gutter, you can look up to the sky, and that is more like, you know, looking ahead and thinking, you know what? Yes, I might still be going through this, but you know, have a positive attitude and think, you know, not facing the gutter and thinking, okay, I don't know what to do, what, you know, but looking upwards and thinking, you know what, I can do this. So there's help out there. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. So how can people reach you? How can they reach you?
Yes. Well, first of all, my full name is Beverly Webb, so I am on Facebook. My practice is called the Step Forward Practice, and the icon is 2 feet. And the left one is pink, and that is for healing. That's for where you are now. The right foot is orange, and that's about taking your step forward. We tend to use our right foot to step forward, and it's about adventure. And I always think about recovery and healing as a new adventure. So even taking one step each day all adds up to a journey. So that's the logo you're looking for, Step Forward Practice. It's got 2 feet, and I'm on Instagram. I've got a Facebook page. I am on LinkedIn, and I also am on YouTube. And that's Step Forward to Have a Voice.
Step Forward to Have a Voice. Fantastic. So what would what type of people do you see, or that do you help?
So generically, I have 2 very different ages for some reason that I seem to attract. So I have a category of, say, 40 and over.
Okay.
And they're often successful people in their own right. And it may be the illness has stopped them being successful, or they've created something and they've done really, really well in whatever it is that they're doing. And suddenly it's all coming apart and they can't cope.
Okay.
You know, and they find it very difficult to be vulnerable because they've always coped. Okay, so that's one type. And then I get a lot of younger people that are coming through now. And they're finding it challenging with lots of different aspects. And sometimes what they're finding challenging is realising that they love their parents, but they have an anger and a resentment, and they can't understand why. And do you know what? Sometimes it's okay to be angry with someone you love, but it's finding ways around that and re-establishing relationships, but it's looking at the relationship with themselves. So I do this through, some people come to me and work with workshops with me because they don't want to do one-to-one at the beginning. That's fine. So they prefer to be in a group. I also work one-to-one with people, and if they're not ready to work with me yet, but they want some support for and recovery from sort of chronic fatigue or ME, fibromyalgia, there's an online program that they can work through independently or with their doctor. And for those people that are, you know, really struggling and have been with a doctor for years, I also coordinate support with their practice, if that's what's right for them. I also do host a wellbeing group for adult survivors of sexual abuse, and we will be starting to do that face to face again, where possible.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Any last word for our audience?
Well, I'd just like to say thank you for listening to me. If there's anybody who's been listening who's triggered, please consider your self-care today. And one thing that's always important, when we get stressed, we only breathe with the top of our chest. And so learning to breathe in and out really slowly is a tool you can put in your toolkit. So if you're feeling anxious, especially listening to this podcast today, just taking 3 deep, slow breaths and allow your body to settle down and give yourself that gift of life.
Yes.
And thank you to you, BC, for inviting me into your guest. It's lovely to see you again and speak with you.
Thank you very, very much, Beverly. Thank you very much. And to our audience, thank you for listening. And you can reach out to Beverly if you, you need that support and you've heard all the things she said. So I will post all that, and you can reach out to her if you need our help. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me this week on the Restored Hope podcast. You can follow me on Instagram at BCG, that's BISSYG, and on my Facebook page, Restored Hope. This is a private group for victims and survivors of domestic abuse where you can receive support, build your confidence, and be empowered to live the life that you love. You can also send me an email at restoredhope21@gmail.com. If you love the show, please share with friends and families. Also subscribe to the show to catch every episode and leave us a review so we can continue to bring you amazing content. Thank you for listening. See you next time for another amazing episode. I remain your lovely host, BC Gbadebo. Bye for now, and God bless.